Well, all right. I'm here with Dave Worland. He is the director of the faith-based initiatives for the governor's office. If you're listening in or watching from around the world, we're in Tennessee, so he's with the Tennessee governor's office, faith-based initiative. Dave, it's great to see you.
Daryl, it's good to be with you. I appreciate the opportunity to share the story of what we've got going.
Well, before we get into all that, we are excited about that, and Tennessee's a special place, we think. But just tell us a little bit about yourself and who Dave Worland is and how you got to this spot.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I've had opportunities over the years to be involved in nonprofit work. I actually have a degree, my only degree is as an undergraduate out of High Point College in North Carolina. It's in nonprofit agency administration. So I knew before I went to college that I want to be involved in nonprofits. And part of that was just, I think, the impact that nonprofits had on my life. And I looked at that and felt like I'd love to be able to return that in some way. But through the years, I've had a chance to be involved in a number of them. And the most recent ones were, and the longest tenure, I was involved in philanthropy. So I was involved with what was the Chattanooga Christian Community Foundations, now Generosity Trust. And then from there went to the National Christian Foundation and served there for 15 years and helped participate with a number of other folks, but helped it to grow to an organization that is having a significant impact across the world right now. It's an incredible group of people and a lot of fun. While I was there, I had the opportunity to meet now Governor Lee. He was interested in starting a local affiliate organization here. And so I know we'll get into that a little bit more depth, but that's how I connected with him. I was on his board and we worked together for a number of years in helping to build that in the Nashville area. So went to school in North Carolina. My family was in Chattanooga, and I'd actually attended the UTC for a season of time, and that's where I had met my wife, a young lady that we knew each other about 7 years before we were married, and we've been married now 35, and we have 4 kids and 8 grandkids. We live here in the Chattanooga area, and my wife's very involved in ministry, marketplace ministry for women, and she's run a day camp for a number of years for children, and it's just been, we just feel a very ideal life. It's been a real blessing to be a part of it and to be in it, I guess I should say. Our 8 grandkids all live relatively close, so we have a chance to see them often, and that part has been an incredible blessing as well. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I've heard grandkids are better.
Yeah. Well, we really, I guess partially because both my wife and I were involved in nonprofit work, and she had been running this camp. But if either one of us kind of got a little bit down on, being a parent or whatever, the other one helped pull us back up. And we really had a ball being parents. We absolutely loved it. And watching those same kids that how they were when they were younger become really good parents has been just a lot of fun and very rewarding. And it is great. It is great because even though we're getting to see them often, we don't have any parental responsibilities. We can just be fun. That part is nice. Yeah, so when they have to go discipline them, I think, oh, great.
Yeah, I've heard that. That's great. Send them home. Yeah, send them.
There you go.
Well, tell us about the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives with the governor's office here in Tennessee. What is that, and what's the role, and how'd that come about? Just tell us a little bit about the vision for that.
Yeah, let me tell you what little history on this, on the whole concept, and I'll let you know how we're doing it, what we think is a little bit different. Back when George Bush was elected president, he launched the Faith-Based Community Initiative out of the White House, and it was a big deal. Everybody was really excited about it, and it should have been. At that time, the major concern was that any of the financial arrangements that were being made within the federal government, there were actually laws on the books and there were policies on the books and just practices that had been carried out for a long time that prevented any faith-based nonprofit, regardless of the outcomes, regardless of how good they were, from participating just because they were faith-based. And he said, we got to change that. And he was right. And they did. And they did a fabulous job with it. They had great, the leaders that headed it up did a super job. There were leaders in every department that were working to try to eliminate those biases. And it just really had a huge impact. From there, about 17 states around the country had launched a faith-based initiative for basically the same reasons, to say, are we preventing our faith-based community from participating in bringing their great work to the citizens of the state they're in. Tennessee did not do that. It wasn't a big issue with us that I could tell from looking back, but it wasn't one of the states that launched it. That movement, after all that kind of happened, kind of started dying away. There are still initiatives like that, but they're typically tucked in under Health and Human Services or in some other places and doing great work, but it's not at the same level as it was when George Bush was president. But when Bill Lee was running for governor, he thought about it and said this is something that he wanted to do. He wanted to leverage the brilliance and the strength of the nonprofits in the state of Tennessee for the benefit of Tennesseans. I was fortunate that I was one of the guys that they talked to about the program, and while he was running, and then after he was elected, he contacted, and I don't know how many other people were contacted, but they ultimately asked me to take it on, and I was thrilled for the opportunity. When I sat down with the governor and said, okay, what is it? Help me unpack this thing. He said, well, we want to leverage the faith-based and nonprofit community for the benefit of the citizens. And I said, yep, got that. Unpack that a bit more. He said, that's all I got. You take it from here, you figure it out, you bring it back to me, and we'll agree on it as we're moving forward. And so that's what I've done. Of course, he knew that I love to stand up things. I like to organize them. I'm really comfortable with that little bit of direction and then beginning to pull it off. Yeah. So I spent the first 9 months traveling the state and meeting with nonprofit leaders and community leaders and mayors and councilmen and others, just to get a sense of both what they saw as the needs, what they saw as the opportunities. I didn't want to duplicate anything, but I wanted to make sure that what we were doing was adding value to what was already there. There's a lot of great nonprofits that are out there in the state doing absolutely amazing work. And in every major community, there's already a group that's bringing a lot of nonprofits together doing great work like yours. And so we don't want to duplicate that. We're not about that. We are about trying to leverage that and figure out what we can do. So we began then 9 months of kind of investigation and review and traveling the state, and then sat down and came up with a couple things. One is that our vision is for people of faith and goodwill to inspire and implement those transformative solutions that are improving lives for fellow Tennesseans. Important words, the transformative solutions were one. We were looking for those things that we felt were really making a difference in the state. We weren't interested in just, celebrating things or encouraging things because they sound good or look good or have a short-term effect, but we were looking for those things to transform. And then the second really really talked about what the governor had, but that was to leverage the capacity of the faith-based and nonprofits in solving some of the greatest challenges in our community or in our state. So out of that, what we developed was our main focus going forward is really addressing the idea of what are the greatest social challenges that we have. How do we bring together those faith-based leaders, the nonprofit leaders, the academicians, the practitioners, the business leaders, the philanthropists, the state leaders that are all involved in trying to resolve that, and see if we can develop a common statewide strategy around some of those greatest solutions or greatest social challenges that we have out there, and see if we can actually make a difference during the time that we're here. We're going to begin, the governor has 3 major agenda items he's had since he came on board. One was dealing with the criminal system that's out there, the folks that are incarcerated, and in the social sector, social services sector, it's called decarceration. It's the goal of actually getting people fewer people in prison than there are today. And some of that is through prevention. Some of that is through current or work within the prison to help people get prepared when they come out. And then it's so much work that we've heard a lot about of once they get out, how do we help them through that process? But decarceration is a major issue. Education reform, and health reform were his three big ones. We found that while I was working in the area across the state, we found that there was a lot of work that was already taking place in this real unified effort statewide, a lot of leadership, but they just didn't have the platform of the governor's office. And so one of the things that we're working on right now is working through a process on homelessness. How do we reduce homelessness? So we put together a task force of those individuals. Many of them were already meeting together and know each other. You can imagine that once COVID-19 kicked in, we took a pretty strong pivot from the idea of developing a long-term strategy to how do we help care and protect for them today. And I've been involved in that heavily since the crisis began. And we've been very blessed. There's been very few people that are homeless that have contracted the disease. We've got great people across the state that are working in those communities, trying to help them and protect them. And now being able to coordinate them with the unified command and the governor's office and the others to be able to help make sure they have the resources they need has been really great. So homelessness is one that we found a network already in place working, and so we're working with them to develop statewide strategies to reduce homelessness. The second was a pretty strong movement that actually had begun with the previous administration around foster care, increasing foster care and adoptive parenting. The support services around that and the processes around that. So our first three that we're going to try to attack as far as major social changes are going to be that decarceration, the foster care and adoption, and homelessness. Now, as they progress, as we're moving forward with them, because we're relying on these nonprofit leaders, academicians, and others coming together, all volunteer, but as they move to a certain point and progress, we'll launch the next ones out. We've identified there's probably 12 total areas that we think we can have some impact in. And the main activity of what we're doing is trying to just spend time with, again, those practitioners, academicians, others, to come together and say, can we develop a strategy? Then once the strategy is developed, then leveraging out the work that's already taking place in the nonprofits. It just helps focus everything. We think that it will generate some additional funding, not necessarily from the state, but from philanthropy, once they see a concerted effort across the state and your participation in that area. So we'll find out. So that's kind of the big picture where we are. Our current activities that we've been involved in, we did launch, the very first thing we did is launch a prayer initiative, where we began to pray for legislators, judiciary, and the executive branch. And what we've done is we've developed we've mapped this thing out. We've got hundreds of people. I'd love to have thousands of people praying, but we started with the premise of what do we want for these individuals, not what do we want from them. So we never pray for a legislative agenda or something we're asking for them. What we are asking for is wisdom and discernment and grace and love and care and compassion, things that we want in our leaders so that when they're leading, they'll do an excellent job. Yeah. And again, it goes out every day. Anybody wants to sign up, love to have you come to our website, sign up. We'd love to have you sign up. Second thing we've done is we're looking at a statewide database of nonprofits, faith leaders, and then an asset mapping of the state agencies. Now, there's a lot of folks that have been involved in parts of that throughout. But what we're finding is that there's not one central place where we can do that. So we're looking at a lot of different avenues. We've been working on it a while, and it's getting closer in our direction, but we're still trying to figure out the most effective and efficient way to do that. A number of state agencies are working on it as well, and they've been very cooperative in coming together to say, how can we create one that would be helpful? And the intent is, as we sit in that space that's right in the middle between the state agencies, the state government, the faith community, and the nonprofit community, that where do we find those natural intersections? And if we're looking at building out a statewide strategy toward achieving some of those areas, where do each of those people, organizations play, and can we bring them together in such a way that they're going to have an impact? That's the goal. So the prayer initiative, the common database, or what we're calling a community services portal, and then these statewide strategies are key. I will tell you that with the COVID-19 crisis, and you mentioned the tornadoes earlier in a conversation, those have all kind of changed a lot of our direction, our long-term direction. Yeah. Still moving forward with things that we can. But we've been very involved. We moved our whole homeless committee and then brought in other folks from around the state, and we've been focusing on that, on protecting and caring for the homeless community. Yeah. And it's been a great thing. It's been a lot of work. There are policy issues. A ton of federal money has been coming down. How do we make sure it's allocated properly? How do we get it to the right places? Not that I'm doing that, but trying to help advise those folks that are doing that to do it well.
Well, that's so important. I think, I don't know that most folks, that kind of the average Joe Christian, I use that term probably too much, but anyway, just the regular everyday Christian that or person of faith, whoever that may be, that's involved in their church or synagogue or mosque or whatever their faith expression may not have any idea that you and people like you are doing this work to unify faith-based initiatives around the state and to help serve us more effectively, because we all understand, I think, the porous nature, of our community, that there are a lot of people that get caught between the cracks, that fall kind of in pockets of vulnerability that are often overlooked as we're thinking about being inconvenienced by COVID-19 because we're having to stay in our fairly nice homes, in our fairly nice communities. It's easy to overlook some folks that may not be in that kind of spot and that are really dealing with crisis as a way of life, not just as a season of life. Yeah, huge. Yeah. Well, talk to us about, speaking of crisis, we early in March, I think right after, I think I saw you maybe just right after the tornado came through my community, and then the virus kind of came on us. Then Chattanooga experienced, and North Georgia experienced some destructive tornadoes. And so we've all been, 2020 has been off to a tough start. We still have a lot ahead of us. Maybe it'll get better, but it's been a tough start. What have you, we can hope, but what have you seen in the faith-based community that's encouraged you? How have you seen churches and others come together to serve the community? What's that been like as you've traveled around the state?
Oh, it is absolutely incredible. I mean, it's in these times of crisis that I think most people do stop and recognize what the churches and the faith-based communities are doing, what the nonprofit community is. I mean, even up when I first started up in Nashville after the tornadoes, north of Nashville, on up into Cookeville, and you go up into Cookeville, for example, and you'd have the two largest ones that were there. Well, first of all, the command center was set up in a church. The church just came and said, look, here's what we've got. Here's all the space you need, whatever. You have it. You're available. And it was the command center for everything that was taking place. Yeah. Samaritan's Purse came in from out of town and signed up, thousands of donors that went to Cookeville to work. Tennessee Baptist Disaster Relief, and then so many individual churches and so many individual organizations that went up there. I've talked to so many people that have either been there or they're currently involved there or they're still involved because, all this other stuff's gone on. The tornado damaged areas are still damaged. They're still rebuilding. They still need the nonprofits and the government and the friends and people coming in and helping. And we've had people from all over the country in nonprofit world that have reached out and said, how can we help? And it's just been a privilege to be able to connect them with the leaders that are working in those spaces and seeing that done. When I went over right after the tornadoes occurred here in Chattanooga, and I went over to Cleveland, Bradley County area, and then the Hamilton County area, just to see churches. And I mean, we were over there one night at maybe 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. It was real close to dark, and there was a church group that was still out there, had the name on the side of their car, and had volunteers, and they were still going in and still working, and it's such an incredible thing that people have this desire. I was speaking at a Zoom conference not too long ago on mental health issues with this, and we were talking about just a little analogy. People in the midst of this COVID crisis, when they're all concerned about their own things, and they they don't know about their jobs, they don't know a lot of things, their whole lives have been completely inconvenienced. But when this tornado occurred, they came out of their homes and they went up in thousands to be able to work. Now, they've got masks on, they're being very careful, they're doing all the right things, but I mean, they saw this incredible damage that took place in somebody else's life, and they inconvenienced themselves, if you will, to go and help somebody they didn't even know because of a need that they have. And with this mental health issues that we were talking about, and this is what we're seeing happening all over with everything going on. I mean, but people that don't know other people that are coming out of their homes to do that. I was on a call earlier today. We had put a call out to churches on a previous pastor call that we had. The senior citizens in the state, we have an agency in our state that takes care of seniors and will provide Meals on Wheels and do a number of things as they're registered. They were just asking, they wanted to do just touch calls, where somebody would just call them up and say, hey, would you be willing, how are you doing? What do you need help with? They need food. They make a call. They get that arranged to do all this kind of stuff. We put the call out to these churches and mentioned it. And she said today, they've been overwhelmed with volunteers.
Yeah.
Churches just wanting to respond and say, how can I help? They're just saying, tell me how to help. And they're helping. So, I mean, it is very cool. And I've seen it with helping school kids get food. I've seen it with seniors just getting calls. I've seen these tornado victims whose yards have been cleared. I mean, they wake up in the morning and there's a crowd of people in their front yard with chainsaws. They don't have any idea who they are. They thank them. They go to the next yard, and they're just doing this all day long. It's been really incredible.
Yeah, we had to turn people away. The work that had to be done got done so fast that I know your office reached out and some other offices reached out and wanting to come help. And it's like, well, you can come and watch, 50 people carry a limb across the yard if you want to. But I think we got it now. So it was so incredible and it was encouraging, and we needed that obviously for 100 reasons. But it was just absolutely amazing to see how eager people were to come beside those that were hurting. Well, let me talk about this question. It's going to come up and it needs to come up, but just people of faith in the public square and just the value of that. And we all understand there is a reason for a separation of church and state in the sense that the government doesn't run the church, and we're not a state, we're not a state-run churches and so on. But that never was intended to keep Christians out of the public square or people of faith out of the public square. Talk to us about just how important it is for just individual Christians or people of faith, whoever they are, to stay engaged in the public square. Why is that important?
Oh my goodness, it is critically important. When you look at the history of our country, you look at the history of any country that has had any kind of growth or any kind of activity, what you're going to find is that it's the people that are thinking outside themselves, when they have a vision for something bigger than themselves, that they realize that they get to participate in and that they have a valuable role in. And I think that's especially true here in everything that we're talking about, whether it's involved in local government, whether it's a city or a county or the state. The voice of the individual is critically important. And what we need is people of good moral character that are both running for office and being involved in things, but also voicing their opinion. The ideal place is not one role or another. It's not if you're a pastor or if you're a politician or if you're whatever. Your best role may be running and owning the company that you're in, providing great work for people, worthwhile work for people that need to make a good living, and you're providing for all of their families and caring for who they are. And at the same time, you can share with them. There are lots of things that can be done legally about sharing with them either your faith or your work, or giving them opportunities to express their own faith. But in terms of the market square, I will tell you, particularly when it comes to the politics, I wasn't heavily involved in politics before. I was involved in nonprofit work and philanthropy, but not in politics. But I have found that so many of the folks that are in politics really rely on the voices that they hear from their constituents. And I will tell you, if there's something important to you, at an absolute minimum, you may think, well, it doesn't matter, they're never going to pay attention. I will promise you, everyone that I've talked to pays attention to these things. I will get a call from somebody because one constituent called them and was asking a question about it. It's just really important, and your voice is important. And what you need to do, what I consider, a friend of mine talks about the 5 areas of stewardship, which a lot of our lives, if we drive around those, we talk about time a lot. We talk about talents and giftedness we have. We talk about treasure, how we steward that. But he really introduced to me the idea of stewarding relationships that we have and stewarding the truth. And he's talking specifically about the Word of God. Now, my tradition, as you know, I'm a Christian. It's my tradition, and so I respect the other traditions that are out there. But I can speak from my tradition. And when God tells me things, when I'm reading his word and or I feel like through prayer that God has really shared with me something, I have a responsibility, a stewardship responsibility to do something with that truth. I can't just sit on it on my own and say, well, that's good for me. There's something I have to do with it. And if that's carrying that to the market square, then that's part of what I have to do. It's a stewardship responsibility. It's not just, it's not an arrogance, or it's not a thing that I'm absolutely right and somebody else isn't. But it is a stewardship. If God's given me knowledge, I have a responsibility to share it wisely and effectively and respectfully with others around us.
I love that. I've been reading Daniel here in the last few mornings, and just so impressed with the way that he did that, and the way that the prophet Daniel there in the Old Testament would speak into the life of the leader in a way that was respectful, in a way that showed deference and respect for the position, although they were all brutal dictators, but he was respectful, but he did speak the truth at great risk to his own life on many occasions. But I thought it was interesting, Dave, that he would often give the king the chance to do the right thing without losing face. That he didn't back the king into a corner at every chance that he had, that the stewardship that he had in that moment, he showed a lot of respect and gave the leader the chance to do the right thing. And he did many times. Other times, didn't. And those lessons were short-lived and whatever. But the way that Daniel engaged in that environment just continues to impress the hound out of me. So I think those are great models, and those 5 areas of stewardship are, I think, that's a great way to circle around those things. A couple other things before I let you go. We're talking on April the 22nd, which is a Wednesday. This will drop in a few days from now, so things may change. But I know a lot of churches and other faith-based groups are thinking about reopening and what that might look like in the next few weeks and months. I know you don't know the future. You don't have a crystal ball. But in your conversations with the governor's office and other folks that are working on this issue, just whatever guidance you might give, it can be kind of general or it can be specific, Dave, just whatever you got that would help us think through what a wise path forward might look like.
Yeah, we are hoping that within the next few days that we'll be able to put out some guidance. I've been working on that with a group of other folks and getting input from people in other states and other things that they've done, and trying to make sure that what we're doing is large enough that covers all types of churches, but yet really provides some reasonable guidance. And so directionally, what I can tell you is that I think our governor's worked hard on religious liberty. And so it really is up to the local churches. He's not going to come in and dictate how the church ought to do the things that they're doing. In fact, during this whole process, we never said, shut the church down. Yeah. We asked for cooperation in that. And I will tell you that I believe that it was the voluntary cooperation of the churches, the mosques, the temples, the synagogues, that the voluntary work there that really helped stem the tide on this. You can only imagine with what grew in Tennessee, if the churches and all were continuing to meet, how much faster it would have gone. And that was the main reason they asked, was to not meet, was the protection of seniors and those with vulnerable populations. And that still needs to be on our forefront as we reopen, as we start meeting back in public. So there are some common sense things that most people are already thinking about. We've got to disinfect and clean everything. We've got to figure out ways that we're not handling the same thing as we go through. So you're not, if you're a Christian and you're involved in communion, you're not passing the plate down. And even with tithes and offerings, you're not going to be passing the plate down. It ought to be a place in the back or front or someplace that you'll put it as a form of worship and offering. The social distancing is going to be interesting. I'm counting on creativity of the churches to do that. Some of them I've talked to that don't have pews, but they have chairs. They're kind of forming in these smaller pods and inviting families to sit in these pods around the floor that's what they're planning on as they're looking at it. Others that have pews are going to just have either every other pew and have people stay within pods or something, or in areas together as families. And then they're going to open up what will, for at least a short season, or for some season, we're encouraging folks not to have Sunday school and all yet. Let's kind of get used to being back together first before we jump into that. But they may use those rooms and actually continue with some of the video presence. So you may all come in together, but you may go to your Sunday school room you used to go to with your other people there, or with a few families or something. Not sure how that's going to look, but the idea of having the video feed coming in there, that kind of thing. We are encouraging that things like Sunday school and child care, that hold off on that for a little bit. Let's kind of make sure we don't have a resurgence here. We suspect that there'll be a number of seniors that will and people in the vulnerable populations that may not come back initially. And people shouldn't see that as a negative. They ought to see it as a positive, if they need to take care of themselves, and the church needs to do that. But the reality is it's going to change across the state, because you've got small rural communities where you may have a church of 25 to 50. Well, they may all be there. They maybe have had very little impact, or very few people in their community that have gotten COVID, and it's a pretty safe environment for them to be there. It's just going to depend, and there are general guidelines of cleanliness, and the thing's probably going to hurt me the most is we are recommending that we don't run the coffee stations. If you like coffee in the morning when you get to church, hanging out with your friends, that kind of stuff. We're saying
donuts that's the win. Yeah.
That's it. That's right. Unless you can get them prepackaged individually and set them 6 feet apart and see what happens. I don't know it's not going to work. But this is, for a season. A couple of things to keep in mind is that oftentimes when you look at these pandemics, that if you're not careful, and I think we are being very careful, but if you're not careful, the second wave that comes in can be worse than the first wave.
Yeah.
So part of what we're asking the churches to do is let's be wise. We're actually calling for spiritual insight and common sense to how do we lead our flock? How do we help our folks to be able to not only grow emotionally and spiritually, but how do we protect them physically? And that's the church has a real role in that. So that's kind of general direction. I hope that was helpful. There will be some guidance, but it will simply be guidance. We're asking churches to begin to gather together and think about these things and make these decisions on their own.
Well, I appreciate all that. Just the last question. We're so grateful for your work and the work of your office. And what are some ways that churches and synagogues, people of faith, and other nonprofit organizations can support you or support your work or come beside you? What are just some ways that we can be a part of the solution?
Well, I think a couple of areas. Continue to do what they do well. I would say for churches and business leaders that have the capacity to continue to support the nonprofits that are out there, it would be great. A lot of them are suffering right now at a time when we really need them the most. Financially, they're struggling. So really think about those that are that are making impact in your own community and support those. If you've got surplus funds within a church or synagogue or mosque and you can help, now's a great time to do that. I think as we progress through these times and we get beyond these crises that we're in, just this idea of creating this statewide strategy is going to be really important. We're sending out, for example, a survey soon where we're asking for houses of worship to just share with us, and particularly smaller ones, because with the bigger ones you kind of hear about a lot. They're easy to track down, but it's there's 12, 13,000 churches out there, and you've got a number of them. We'd go into these small towns, we'd find some that were feeding the poor or clothing people or caring for ways that we had no idea. They're not going to appear on some nonprofit list. They're not going to appear somewhere. It's just a group of people coming together to make a difference in a community. Well, we would like to know about them, because if we know that they're out there, so the survey we're sending out is asking those questions. And I would say when that comes out, if people will use their networks, church networks, friend networks, to make sure churches see that, get it, and get the information back to us, it allows them a voice in this process of creating statewide strategy. And as we learn things that are happening, then it allows us to be able to share with them the information that's going on.
Yeah.
I think the second way, I mentioned earlier, the prayer. We really believe in the power of prayer. And I think if people will join us in that, we'll see the state continue to be blessed in many ways that it is. And again, I tell our staff all the time, the win of a nonprofit or a church is our win. I mean, we're here to leverage what's currently taking place.
Yeah.
If people find things that are going well and they want to reach out and let us know, I'd love to hear from them. We're here to serve and we're here to learn, and anything that we can do to help, we want to do. Ultimately, we're about helping citizens, help citizens have a better place to live. So
we love it, and we're so grateful. I know our church is very much engaged in the community, and the networks that the relational networks and business and education and nonprofit, and then of course everyone's Wilson coalition of churches here in our community doing that work. And we just find that we really can move the needle in individual communities when we're communicating, when we're working together, when we know each other's names, and we know, and we can cheer for each other. And so that's made a huge difference in our city and in our county as we're trying to come beside, kids and schools and government leaders, public officials trying to do their job. So I appreciate what you're doing and how we can partner together in that. It means a lot. Dave, thanks for joining us today. I, again, appreciate your work and the work of your office. Y'all are super, and we're just really honored in Tennessee to be able to have folks like you working on our behalf. So thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Daryl. Thank you for all you're doing. I tell you, it's been exciting to see what impact you guys are having, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.